Impacts of history. The events of the past are very important to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. These events weren't that long ago. There are many people alive today who were forcibly removed from their parents under government policy, had their children taken away, were not allowed in towns after 6 o'clock at night, were not allowed to be in certain areas without permission, were barred from schools and hospitals, returned from wars only to find they did not have the same rights as white people, have not enjoyed the same rights as others, simply because they were indigenous. There are even a few very old people today who witnessed killings and poisonings as young children. This affected those people deeply. Intergenerational trauma. When people experience trauma, the wounds can also affect their children, and their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. When someone is traumatized by a difficult event, their life is often turned upside down by emotional wounds. And if they are unable to heal those wounds themselves, they can pass them on to their children. Many generations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples around the nation have been affected by traumatic events in the last 100-200 years. These experiences have included war in the earlier years as they tried to defend their country, or continue to live on it, widespread death from disease, slavery, forced removal from land, imprisonment, often for offenses they didn't know they decommitted, being taken from their parents and families at a young age and held in institutions, where abuse of children was often rife, having their children taken from them, and many other traumatic experiences. A non-Indigenous example of intergenerational trauma. Many Vietnam veterans were traumatized by their experiences in the Vietnam War and found it difficult to heal from those wounds because their experience was not widely honored until years later. For some of these men, these wounds played out in the form of addiction, alcoholism, violence, suicide, or simply an inability to truly connect with others. Some of their children then were raised in a traumatic environment, deeply affected by their father's or mother's wounds. Those children then develop their own wounds, which also get played out in addiction, suicide, etc., and so it gets passed down the generations. One of the big differences between Vietnam veterans and those from previous wars was that, on their return, their nation as a whole did not acknowledge what they had been through. Because of this, individuals, families and governments have had to explore how to ensure that these wounds are healed, so that the intergenerational impacts of that war of 40 years ago are minimized. History records that even where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples shared traumatic experiences with other Australians, they often didn't have the same support extended to them. For example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander veterans from the First and Second World Wars were not provided the same entitlements as their fellow diggers, such as war pensions and cheap housing loans. And, like Vietnam veterans, the fact that the wider community did not know or acknowledge what they had been through has made the healing process very difficult. In many families, intergenerational trauma has been the result.